Hello there, friends, and welcome back to Tim Kirby Russia. This man across from me, Andrei Afanasyev. Well, first off, I've known him for a long time. Secondly, he speaks amazing English. And thirdly, we're not here to praise his English today. We're here to praise his achievements as filming a lot of the Donbass. Andrei, you've been all over the war zone, from what I understand. You've seen the real realities of the war. And that's what I want to talk to you today. So first question, so that way everyone in the audience understands. And secondly, guys, if you're on Tim Kirby Russia Hardcore, if you write a message anywhere under any post, guess what? I'll see it. Written questions only today, no audio, because I have not solved our audio problems. Okay, Andrei, where have you, what is your journalistic work in the Donbass looked like? Where have you been? You know, what were you doing there? What are you doing there in some instances? What has this all been about?
Well, first of all, I think I should explain to your audience what I'm doing in general here in Russia.
Even better.
Yeah, so as a journalist, I've always covered a lot of politics, religion, identity. It was something that was really important for me personally, and it was important for me to understand how the world is changing and why is it changing, and how everyone should survive and save his own identity, his culture, his religion, his traditions. So it is personally really important for me, and as you know, Tim, has always been since the times when we were even working on same projects back in 2014, 15, etc.
Yeah.
So
it sounds like
we know each other
now.
Yeah, almost 10 years ago. It was more than 10.
That's crazy. It feels like yesterday.
Yeah.
Just so the audience knows, we both worked together on a basically Christian TV channel for a few years until said channel gave up on TV and became sort of an internet portal, and that's when Andrei and I were sort of no longer needed.
So yeah, and after that I had a lot of things to do. I worked in communications and business, in PR, and then by the beginning of the special military operation, I will call it war because actually it's a war, and it's no problem here in Russia to call it like that, because it's part of a huge conflict that we're contemplating for decades, and I say centuries. So at the beginning of this conflict, I was part-time working for Spas news channel. It's the major Christian conservative TV channel here in Russia that is in every household. Yeah. So it's really big. It is owned by the church, by Russian Orthodox Church. And I host the evening news show, week by week. So I work for 5 days, then I don't work for 5 days, and I also have my own show called Ruski Mir, the Russian world. And the beginning of this operation, for me personally, discovered the lack of understanding of the identity issue here in Russia. Because for a long time, back in Soviet era and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russians have suffered the lack of identity. Our identity was taken from us by communists, then by liberals. So, and it was part of the project to dissolve and destroy and cut Russia into pieces. Yeah. You cannot do this without taking the heart, the soul, the understanding of who you are from the people. And the majority of people here in Russia are, well, Russians, like I say in English, well, the people who have Slavic background, generally Orthodox, and that's it. Yeah. So we and my colleagues, friends, we understood that the lack of identity was a crucial problem for us, because the narrative that was the general mainstream here in Russia in the beginning of the special military operation was too bad. It had, as people say in American part of the internet, low energy. Because it was slightly far from the orthodoxy, from Russian identity, and it had to be changed. And the only way to change it is to become the part of the process and to convince the decision makers that that's the only possible way. So that's how I started my new era of military journalism.
Mm-hmm.
My first trip to Donbass was back in 2014.
Oh,
when
so way before the sort of official war started. Back to the
when it started as the Russian Spring.
Mm-hmm.
After the Crimea came back to Russia, and after Donetsk and Lugansk People Republic announced that they don't want to go west with the rest of Ukraine, and that's the point. For me, that's my war. I feel part of it because I'm Russian. I praise and keep and discover my Russian identity, my Russian heritage background. I know my dynasty on my father's line for 10 generations,
Mm-hmm.
and it's important for me. And I understand the deep roots of the conflict, why it's happening, how it's happening, and where should it go. And I understood that one of the crucial points for us to win, not only to win in the war zone or in sanctions and economic war, but to win in this most difficult spiritual and sense war, the war of senses, of understanding, of interpretation,
Mm-hmm.
is deepening ourselves in our Christian tradition and in our national and cultural identity. And part of it was, of course, the military priesthood, the so-called chaplains,
No.
the religious part of the war, because I believe that this war is definitely a religious war. Inside, it is a
What makes you say that, Andre? Because so far, I've heard you talk most, about yourself in the background. But what sort of proof would you have to someone that this war has a religious character to it?
Well, I just finished that, so that's why I started.
Okay, we'll get to that later. Okay.
Yes, I will. I need to explain my motivation to your audience. So, and I started going to Donbass, to Donetsk, to Lugansk, to Zaporozhye. This Friday I came back from Kharkov region,
Mm-hmm.
just to see yourself and watch yourself, and not to count on eyes of other person, even if it's a good colleague of mine or yours. Still, you need to see, feel, hear, touch it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I started doing this. And this Friday, as I said, I came back from my 10th trip to Donetsk, to the war zone, because it was Kharkov region, since the beginning of the special military operation. So in a year and a half, I've done 10 trips there.
Mm-hmm.
So this is definitely a religious war. And to explain it, I will need some time.
Okay.
It will
We've
be a
got
short
time today, man.
lecture. Good. So I understand that for a lot of Westerners, Russia, Ukraine, all the other parts of ex-Soviet Union or Russian Empire is something really far from them. And a lot of people know nothing about our history, about what's happening. So we need to go back to 13th century.
Mm-hmm.
So medieval Russia, before the epoch of Mongolian horde. As you know, Mongols came to our lands in 13th century, in the middle of the 13th century. At this time, Russia was a sort of a conglomerate of feudal states. and each of state had its own knyaz or prince or king,
Yeah, yeah.
and it was almost totally autonomous.
Mm-hmm.
The third capital of ancient Rus was Kiev. The first one was Ladoga, that's not far from St. Petersburg, so it's north of today's Russian Federation. The second one was Novgorod. I mean, the
yeah,
great
they're
Novgorod.
proud of that up there. They never forget.
Yeah, they never forget. Yeah, even though now it's quiet and provincial, good, clean, but provincial city of about 200,000 people. Back in 10th century, and in 9th century, it was the capital and the core of Russian civilization, the core of our state. And then the third capital was Kiev because it was to the south, and at this time Russians controlled this important trading route between Scandinavia and Constantinople. It is called Izvaryak в Greki, from Varangians to Greeks. The rivers on our European territory were used as main transporting arteries. So, 13th century, on the one hand, we have tremendous pressure from the West.
Yeah.
Because at this time, we suffered from the schism.
Yeah, the break between the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, yeah.
Yes, as an Orthodox person, I would say the break of the West from the Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
For me,
the Rome is the one who made the changes that caused it. So they were the one who took the action that caused it by
and for the first millennium, the first 1,000 years, the West was as Orthodox as the East for us. So we praise St. Ambrose of Milano, we praise Saint Kings of Britain, of Spain, and the last saint that was both a proclaimed saint in the East and in the West is Saint Olaf, the Norwegian. And here in Russia, a lot of people know him, praise him. I do praise him. He's the patron saint of our city of Vyborg. And he is the person who Christianized Norwegian people. And we here in Russia, we know more about him than the Norwegians probably now.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised at this point.
Yeah, yes. And for us, he's our saint.
Yeah.
For me, St. Olaf is my saint, just like St. Ambrose of Milano, St. Augustine, or any other St. Leo.
Even the Ethiopian ones?
Definitely, of course, yeah. So, and we were suffering from the pressure of crusaders from the West, predominantly Germans, from Teutonian Order, from Livonian Order. Their aim was to Latinize and Polonize or Germanize our land. So, to destroy everything Russian and everything Orthodox here, and make us part of this great Western project of Vatican.
Yeah.
From the East, we were suffering from the Mongolian horde. The enormous numbers of nomadic tribes united into the best and bloodiest army of this time. No one could fight them. Everyone was defeated. They've traveled from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe, and we were on the brink of a collapse of our states under the pressure of the horde. I mean, the Russian states, the Russian princedoms, right? Княжества.
Yeah. Princedoms.
No, yeah.
Or principality, maybe. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Princedom's good enough.
Okay. Our feudal states.
Yeah.
And at this time, this conglomerate, this confederation of Russian Orthodox feudal states had two big leaders. two strong people, two people that were the strongest politicians and the strongest leaders. These were Saint Alexander Nevsky and Daniel Galitsky. And Alexander Nevsky was the Prince of Novgorod, so that's the northern part of the whole Russia. So Novgorod is between today's Moscow and St. Petersburg. And Daniel Galitsky was the Prince of Galicia and Volyn. It is today's Western Ukraine. And these two leaders represent two approaches to our history and to our political understanding and understanding of where and how the Russians should go and how we should be. They had to decide who to take as a sort of ally in order to save your state, because they were between the anvil and the hammer, and you need to choose with whom to be. The Mongolians, the horde, wanted money. They needed the taxes from us, and also people to take part in their military operations. They were not interested in our interior politics. They were not interested in changing or regulating our religious life and cultural life. Pay money, give us soldiers when we need them, and that's it. That was the conditions of being sort of a vessel to the Golden Horde. The West demanded Latinification. The West demanded that we should become Catholics and change the Orthodoxy to Catholicism and recognize the Pope of Rome as the one and only religious leader in the Christian world. That is heresy from the point of view of Orthodoxy. So they wanted not just money, not just something physical, but they wanted to change the soul, the identity, the heart of the people. And Saint Alexander Nevsky and Daniel Galitsky chose different ways. Saint Alexander Nevsky is sent also because he had a strong spiritual gift. He was a spiritually gifted person, and he understood that Orthodoxy and our faith is the cornerstone of Russian culture, tradition, state, civilization, and if we give it up, we will be destroyed. We will stop existing as something sovereign, something independent, something unique, created by God. So he decided to be with Horde, and Daniel Galitsky became the king of Rus. He got the crown from the representatives of Pope of Rome and became the king of Rus. Being a king means that you are a vassal to Pope of Rome. The only way to become a king is to get a crown from the hands of Pope of Rome. He promised to embrace Catholicism, never did this, but he got the crown, and the guarantee, the Pope of Rome promised him that he will send the help to fight the Horde and to defend the western parts of ancient Russia, of medieval Russia. It never happened, so he just became the king of Rus. He got the crown, never got the help, and for a long time, the part of Rus that was under his rule became vassals and came under the control of Polish, Lithuanian, and German aristocracy. And for more than 2 centuries, for the centuries when the rest of Russia, I mean the big Russia, the Russia, was fighting and defending itself and digesting the Golden Horde, these people, these Russian people of the same background, of the same heritage, the same blood, were under the rule of Catholics. And this is how started the Romanization and Latinization of the western part of Russia, called Ukraine now. By the time we solved the problem with the horde and went back to Siberia and conquered the Siberia and conquered all the states that were part of Golden Horde, in a year and a half, in a century and a half, the Golden Horde divided into several hordes, so it came to the stage of feudal disintegration. We started conquering one by one these hordes: Astrakhan, Kazan, Siberia, all the southern and eastern parts of Russia were conquered or united voluntarily with us without fighting.
Well, yeah, that's also one thing a lot of people don't understand. I won't delay, but many of the regions of Russia actually joined voluntarily, especially to save themselves from other more harsher societies. But anyways.
That's true. And I mean, we saved all the indigenous people. We saved all the peoples that lived and are living now in Siberia, in Far East. We didn't do something the Westerns did to Indians in the U.S.
Well, of course, Andrei, as you know, the State Department has did a lot of work to fund certain people with an interesting interpretation of history who say the opposite without much evidence, but the main thing is they say the opposite online, and that's all that matters.
Well, the main proof of my position is that these people are alive.
Yes.
And they can do this. If we decided to destroy someone, we would do this.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the State Department would experience a lot of troubles finding someone to lie about how terrible it was when Russia came.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, the proof that we were humane is that these people exist, they live, and they're part of our society, like we are. So when Russia solved the problem with the Golden Horde and turned itself to the West in order to get back our historical lands that were populated by our people, with our language, our faith, we started wars with Poland. At this time, Poland and Lithuania united into Rzecz Pospolita. We came there, we reconquered these lands in several bloody wars, and it took us a century or even more. And we saw that some of the people there look like us, feel like us, but they have changed identity. They were Russians who embraced Catholicism, or the so-called Greek Catholicism, so-called Uniates. So the Uniates were created by the Vatican in order to get the control over the Orthodox, because the Uniates keep the Eastern Orthodox tradition, report to Pope of Rome.
I see.
Of the Catholic world.
Well, and isn't it interesting that the Pope would then allow someone to essentially practice the religion, in his opinion, improperly or heretically, as long as they're willing to sacrifice their autonomy to him. That's not very pious.
Well, Pope of Rome is not just a religious leader, but a political leader. So what would you expect from a political leader?
Mm-hmm.
And this how we got this problem. One people, the majority of our people saved our Russian Orthodox tradition and identity, but the part that now forms the elites of today's Ukrainian state are descendants from those who, I will be saying straightforward, who betrayed their identity. Because if you change your religion in order to save your life or get some administrative, economical preferences, it means that you betray your identity. It is that you betray your faith. You're a traitor. And these people, I mean, those who embraced the Western Christianity in order to save themselves or save or get some preferences, these people saw the Russians as a proof that they're traitors. We didn't betray our heritage and our tradition, and some of the people did. So now, the Ukraine, that is a totally synthetic state formed by the communists back in the 20th century, now the Ukraine is ruled by the people with this kind of identity. The majority of people of Ukraine, before the Maidan back in 2014, were just the same as us. But the West did everything to push the political Ukrainians to the top of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have this identity, they change the broken identity.
The broken identity that you relate to the Uniates that were connected to the Catholics. Okay.
Yeah. For example, the Stepan Bandera, this famous leader of Ukrainian pro-Nazi forces in World War II, was son of a Uniate priest.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of Ukrainian Nazis, the people from SS Division Galiciana, were Uniates or people who left the canonical Orthodoxy. Now we see what's happening to canonical church in Ukraine, to the Orthodox Church, the one and only Orthodox Church in Ukraine. It is persecuted, it is killed, it is robbed, it is raped by the state and by the groups of ultra-radical nationalists and Nazis. So this is the short, brief explanation to people that are outside of our conflict. It's a conflict of those who betrayed their identity and want to destroy and erase anything that reminds of their betrayal. And those who didn't betray.
Mm-hmm.
This is the core and the explanation of this centuries-long conflict that is now in hot phase.
Okay. Well, that was our first big question, but we haven't even then touched the surface about then what were you doing then with your journalism? We kind of touched on why you chose to do it, but now the question of what exactly were you doing? And I'd like to apologize to anyone who's watching right now. We've had to play around a lot with the audio since Andrei's been on. People keep saying there's problems, Andrei. So I'll tell you one thing. When the recording goes through, the recording should be good. But for some reason, the audio is not coming through very well for people who are still patient with the live stream. So sorry, guys. Wait for the recording to come out. But anyways, Andrei, tell us then about like what actual journalism did you do in the Donbass then?
I started covering the mobilization, especially in Donetsk region. I visited a lot of units formed from mobilized people, and then we discovered that among the military, the servicemen appeared and started working the new tradition of attributing the names of saints to military units.
Yeah.
Saint Archangel Battalion, Saint Archangel Michael, Saint Andrew the Apostle, Saint Paul. There are dozens of them now fighting in different parts of the war zone, and it was some kind of a reaction of our military, of our servicemen, to the lack of ideology coming from the official part in the beginning of the special military operation. And people need some kind of identity, some kind of symbol, because if definitely, because if your regiment is just letters and numbers and paperwork, it means that you don't have some kind of common identity. And when you become the battalion of Saint Archangel Michael, you have this identity. You can use the image of this spiritual warrior, this angel that fought Satan and threw Satan from the skies to the hell. You can use it as a symbol and as an example of bravery, of honor,
yeah,
of fidelity. And it works. And the so-called moral psychological component, or just the morale, if you play RPG games, it's higher in this kind of units. Unit starts associating itself with this or that saint. It starts fighting better. That's what we see. That's what the military officials confirm. And now it's a huge process, and we are covering it. I also cover the work of a military department of Russian Orthodox Church. A lot of priests go voluntarily to our units to be with the soldiers, to help them, to let them take part in sacraments, the sacrament of confession, the Eucharist. They baptize a lot of people there, and they talk to them, explaining why this war is holy war for us and why they're doing the right thing. Because this war is not just a war inside Russian nation between two kind of religious groups.
Yeah.
War is between the last Christian state, or the state that is formed and still based on Christian values, I mean Russia, and the state that wants to be part of openly satanic today's Western world.
Well, one thing, Andrei,
and of course it's not a fight,
is that, well, with Russia, we had the state enforced atheism for decade upon decade. So the thing is
Unfortunately,
I think Russia wants to be Christian, but have we really actually created the Christian society, which is something that's probably a very interesting question for that a lot of our audience would want you to hear, because that's what a lot of people ask me. They're like, well, if I come to Russia, will I really get to live in this like Christian society, or is that all just a bunch of hype and propaganda?
uh, the thing is that even during the communist era, the majority of our people still preserved and saved the Christian values. Communism came and left. People stayed, and church stayed. Church survived the terrible, bloody communist period of our history. And actually, the communists are those who are to blame for creating the Ukraine as a sovereign state, because it never happened before in history.
Yeah, well, that is true. That cutesy poo trying to redraw the map of the Russian Empire to make it look international or like what would become the European Union has doomed Russia to having all sorts of problems. Obviously, the worst of which being Ukraine. Yeah.
So yes, and the thing is that we definitely suffered from the atheist to the secular period in our history, but we survived it. And for a long time, in my conversations with Westerners, I tell them, if you want to stay in the West and survive, read the stories of our new martyrs, of people who suffered for their Christianity, for their Christian identity in Soviet era, because you are about to experience something our people experienced a century ago.
Yeah. And in some ways maybe even worse, because they suffered specifically for their faith, which they could have, let's just say, it's not so much visible on your face if you're in plain clothing. Whereas in the West, it unfortunately could even come down to a matter of skin color. And
Please
gender.
repeat the question.
No, that was just more of a kind of comment about that. Basically, that, you know, when the communists were repressive against Christians, some people could try to get out of it by hiding their faith. Well, if you're not a priest, you have nowhere to go. But the masses could kind of, almost like when the Mongols came, sort of retreat and keep the faith sort of beyond the repression and sort of try to wait it out. Whereas in some ways, I think with the whole, what you're hinting at about what's happening in the West, there's sort of no way to escape it. There's no way to just sort of like retreat from the repression, because it's on the level of gender even. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no escaping that. There's no waiting that out.
Thank God we didn't have it here. Well, just because of the progress and the technology of the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah.
The Bolsheviks would definitely do this to us, but they didn't have their own instruments. And today's leaders of the West are the new Bolsheviks. Mm-hmm. It's obvious to me that the Bolsheviks were the ones who legalized abortions in Russia. Soviet Russia was the first country in the world to legalize abortions. That happened because of Lenin. Mm-hmm. Who did this? 1921 or 22. Just after the end of the Civil War. It was one of the first decrees.
Yeah. Number one priority.
Yeah. Sacrificing the children. Mm. And they also were the first to install the crematoriums. This modernist technical way of getting rid of the dead body.
So essentially eliminating burial.
Yes, yeah. The traditional burial, because the cemetery, the graveyard, is something that reminds you of your heritage, of who you are.
Mm.
You look at the names, at the dates, and you understand that people lying here for centuries, they make you responsible for this land, for what's happening and what will happen here. It's interesting.
Andre, let me ask you that one. You're probably someone who can actually answer this. Now, one sort of comment I get from a lot of people is that, okay, well, if the Russians kept their faith during communism and are the last Christian nation on earth, how did they allow the Russian Revolution to happen?
Well, this answer will need more time.
Is this a whole separate episode? Maybe you want to come back for that one?
We can do this as a separate episode.
Okay.
Briefly, it all started in 17th century. It all started in 17th century and the westernization of Russia.
So you mean, I think what you're hitting at is, long story short, the corruption of the elite to worship the West.
Definitely. The secularization of the society.
Yeah.
The state control of the church and the westernization of the society in general. And we have experienced the same processes all the world experienced, but our church is the reason we're still alive, because our church is preserving, no matter how hard it is, no matter how many martyrs it will bring, our church preserves the same teaching the apostles got from Jesus Christ. So that's why the reasons we're alive. It's not like Russians are superheroes or we're something special. It is just because we were chosen to be the last bearers of this truth. And understanding this is not a matter for pride, but for me it's a matter of, horror, because you understand that you are the last one, and if you screw, we're done.
Yeah, there's nowhere to retreat to. It's the end.
Yes.
And Andre, I just want to jump in, but I tell a lot of foreign people this very thing, that it's like, they'll start talking to me about how they want to move to Russia, and they'll be like, well, I actually heard that in Russia this thing isn't so great, or, the hospitals don't work so well. Well, this, well, that. It's like, okay, if on the one hand you tell me you're living in Sodom and Gomorrah and this apocalyptic whatever, it's like, well, where else are you going to go if you're going to go anywhere? Where else would a Christian person go? There is nowhere else.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that Russia is a perfect place and everyone here, is a deeply Christian person. No, it's not.
No.
It's not. But here, the society in general, even if one person is not deeply into church, the society in general is formed on Christian values. We still look at a man as a man, woman as a woman, child as a child. And even though we have a huge rate of divorces, abortions are not banned yet.
Well, they're chipping away at the abortion thing. That is changing over time, but yeah.
Yes, yes. And, I lived and studied in Spain, in Madrid, and there I understood the difference between us and them.
Oh.
We have LGBT people. Yes, we do. Do we have abortion? Yes, we do. But the majority of the people say that's not right. It is something bad, something immoral. And the problem of today's West is that the majority, or like huge amount of people, will say that sin is okay.
Yeah.
It's okay to commit sin. Here in Russia, majority of people will say, well, there are sinners, we are sinners, but sin is sin.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Oh my God, dude. And I've tried to explain that to people, and it is so hard. So many people do not get that, you know. And it's all like why I was on this major sort of podcast, and I guess what I'll never be invited back because I tried to use an example of that. How in Russia, even though a lot of people when they're like I don't know 18, 19, 20, they try, you know, they smoke a little marijuana and stuff like that, but it's never going to be legalized here. And I tried to explain to them it's because in Russia, you don't. If enough people do something, that doesn't make it right. Whereas in Western law, it does. And I tried every which way under the sun. So you get that because you're Russian and you're here, and that's obvious when you're in this information space. But for them, they were just like, but it's repressive. But that's like, you know, ancient medieval troglodyte thinking to ban marijuana. So I'm just so glad you brought that up because in some ways you're restoring like my faith in myself, because sometimes, Andre, I feel like I'm just sort of on a one-man army here, and maybe I'm even making stuff up about Russia, who knows. So it's nice to be a little confirmed in my beliefs. But anyways, sort of carrying on, I think so. Would you maybe say that in some ways Russia sometimes is kind of like someone who might be an alcoholic who knows that they should stop drinking, but it's a challenge to stop drinking?
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. We are not in good shape, but at least we understand it. At least a lot of people understand it. That's one point. The other point is that this fight in Ukraine is not a fight against Ukrainians or some kind of Ukrainian state, because there is no Ukrainian state. Mm-hmm. If West stops funding and supplying Ukraine, the war will stop in a week.
Yeah.
That's obvious.
Yeah.
It means, I mean, if China, Iran, North Korea say, well, Russia, do your business yourself, that's actually what they do say. Nothing will change for us because we are fighting on our own. Mm-hmm. And if West says this to Ukraine, there will be no Ukraine. It means only one thing: there is no Ukraine already.
Yeah.
Because to be something, you need to stand on something. And Ukraine has only Western supplies and funding. And West does it because, you know, it's interesting. When I was a student in GIMO, it's a university of foreign ministry of Russia, and it is considered one of the best university for humanities here in our country. Mm-hmm. When I was a student back in, I think, 2008, we had a geopolitics course, and our professor, who was a general colonel and a high-ranking person back in 90s in our Ministry of Defense, he said that the West knows that Russia will get back the Ukrainian lands. And they prepared a plan according to which Russia will get totally destroyed infrastructure, people with low culture and low demographic potential, mm-hmm. a lot of ecological problems, and we'll have to spend a lot of time restoring it. What we see now is that this plan is working.
Well, yeah, it's going to be very expensive. The four new, well, to use American parlance, the four new states that Russia acquired, they have to be essentially rebuilt completely from scratch, from nothing.
Yes, and well, we do this now, but I mean, at this time, I just didn't have an idea how this could happen. Will West interfere and we will have a fight with Germans and Poles on Ukrainian territory? No one could even imagine that we will have a war with ourselves on our own land. So if we use a metaphor, the West cut out or tore out a hand or an arm from us,
Yeah.
and is now beating us with this arm.
Yeah. Well,
You
about Andre, about no one could expect. I don't think I've ever said this on any media before. But when I was a volunteer in Kazakhstan, I had students that I taught English to. So these are 14, 15, 16-year-olds. And one time they even told me, because I said I wanted to visit other parts of the former Soviet Union, and they said you can never go to the Central Valley in Uzbekistan, and you can never go to Western Ukraine because they'll hate you there. They knew. The school children in Kazakhstan, they knew just how much the Western Ukraine and apparently the valleys of Uzbekistan hate us here.
That's true. And we must understand that this hatred is funded, is institutionalized, and is controlled from the West for decades and centuries. And the biggest problem is that for a long time we were ignoring this problem, and now we have what we have. Because the so-called soft power of Russia was weak. We know it. You and me, we've covered and said a lot about this.
Oh, yeah, Andre. As two people who work in the media, we know just how bad certain aspects of Russian soft power are. How frustratingly, mind-destroyingly bad.
Yes.
Sorry.
So, but it doesn't mean we should stop our fight.
I never will.
Never will I. Neither will I. So that's the point. And people in the West supporting Ukraine, they're just supporting the digestion of part of Russia by the West.
Mm-hmm.
They support the control of the globalist neoliberal khaganate over several dozens of Russians that could form the new demographic potential for an independent pole of the world where people will have the privilege of staying people, of staying men, women, children, Christian families.
No.
That's it. So any conservative, any Christian in the West, you must understand that that's what we see is the first war of an openly satanic state, and a state that is trying to wake up from a century-long sleeping. And that is trying to remember, to remind ourselves who we are and what we should do.
Well, Andrei Afanasyev, I promised you I'd only keep you for an hour today, and we're at about the hour mark, so I don't even think we really scratched the surface on these things, and especially about what you've even seen with your own eyes in the Donbass. So maybe you could come back in a week or 10 days or something like that, and we could carry on. Anyways, friends, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I'm going to try to solve our audio problem soon, but I'm sure if you're watching this on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, or now Brighteon, the audio is probably amazingly clear because OBS is a wonderful system. Anyways, thank you, Andre, and I'll see you very soon.